British Victory, Australian Frontier Wars, is a term applied by some historians to violent conflicts between Indigenous Australians and non-Indigenous settlers during the British colonisation of Australia. The first fighting took place several months after the landing of the First Fleet in January 1788. And the last clashes occurred in the early 20th century. As late as 1934, a minimum of 40,000 Indigenous Australians and between 2,000 and 2,500 settlers died in the wars. However, recent scholarship on the frontier wars in what is now the state of Queensland indicates that Indigenous fatalities may have been significantly higher. Indeed, while battles and massacres occurred in a number of locations across Australia, they were particularly bloody in Queensland, owing to its comparatively larger pre-contact Indigenous population. In 1770, a British expedition under the command of then-Lieutenant James Cook made the first voyage by Europeans along the Australian east coast. On the 29th of April, Cook and a small landing party fired on a group of Dharawal people who sought to prevent the British from landing at the foot of their camp at Botany Bay. Described by Cook as a small village, two Dharawal men made threatening gestures and a stone was thrown to underline that the British were not welcome to land at that spot. Cook then ordered a musket to be fired with small shot, and the elder of the two was hit in a leg. This caused the two Dharawal men to run to their huts and seize their spears and shields. Subsequently, a single spear was thrown towards the British party, which, happily, hurt nobody. This then caused Cook to order a third musket with small shots to be fired, upon which one of them threw another lance and both immediately ran away. Cook did not make further contact with the Dharawal. Cook, in his voyage up the east coast of Australia, observed no signs of agriculture or other development by its inhabitants. Some historians argue that under prevailing European law such land was deemed terra nullius, or land belonging to nobody, or land empty of inhabitants. Cook wrote that he formally took possession of the east coast of New Holland on the 22nd of August 1770 when, on Possession Island off the west coast of Cape York Peninsula, the British government decided to establish a prison colony in Australia in 1786. Under the European legal doctrine of terra nullius, Indigenous Australians were not recognised as having property rights and territory could be acquired through original occupation, rather than conquest or consent. The colony's governor, Captain Arthur Phillip, was instructed to live in amity and kindness with Indigenous Australians and sought to avoid conflict. The British settlement of Australia commenced with the First Fleet in mid-January 1788 in The southeast in what is now the federal state of New South Wales. This process then continued into Tasmania and Victoria from 1803 onward. Since then, the population density of non-Indigenous people has remained highest in this region of the Australian continent. However, conflict with Aboriginal people was never as intense and bloody in the southeastern colonies as in Queensland and the northeast of the continent. More settlers, as well as Indigenous Australians, were killed on the Queensland frontier than in any other Australian colony. The reason is simple, and is reflected in all evidence and sources dealing with this subject. There were more Aboriginal people in Queensland. The territory of Queensland was the single most populated section of pre-contact Indigenous Australia, reflected not only in all pre-contact population estimates, but also in the mapping of pre-contact Australia. The Indigenous population distribution illustrated below is based on two independent sources. Firstly, on two population estimates made by anthropologists and a social historian in 1930 and in 1988. Secondly, on the basis of the distribution of known tribal land. All evidence suggests that the territory of Queensland had a pre-contact Indigenous population density more than double that of New South Wales, at least 6 times that of Victoria, and at least 20 times that of Tasmania. Equally, there are signs that the population density of Indigenous Australia was comparatively higher in the northeastern sections of New South Wales and along the northern coast from the Gulf of Carpentaria and westward, including certain sections of the Northern Territory and Western Australia. The effects of disease, Infertility, loss of hunting grounds, and starvation on the Aboriginal population were significant. There are indications that smallpox epidemics may have impacted heavily on some Aboriginal tribes. With depopulation in large sections of what is now Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland up to 50% or more, even before the move inland from Sydney of squatters and their livestock. Other diseases hitherto unknown in the indigenous population, such as the common cold, flu, measles,